Jake Morrison owned 3,000 acres of prime Texas land, the loyalty of half the county who worked for him, and a silence in his heart that had lasted 23 years. But the woman holding the cardboard sign on the courthouse steps, she owned his past. He saw her from across the dusty main street of Millbrook, a hunched figure against the morning sun. Something in the way she held herself, a familiar fragility, made him slow his pickup. As he got closer, the air punched out of his lungs, the auburn hair catching the light just so, the delicate hands, the curve of her neck. It was Sarah Chun, the girl who'd promised to wait for him under the old oak tree, the girl who had vanished from his life without a single word, leaving a hole that all the money and land in Texas couldn't fill. But this wasn't the Sarah he remembered. This woman's clothes were worn thin, her shoes had holes, and the cardboard sign in her hands read, in neat but faded letters, "Anything helps. God bless." Jake's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. What in God's name had happened? What cruel twist of fate had brought the girl who dreamed of opening a bakery to this exact spot at this exact moment? He pulled into a parking space, the engine a low growl, and just watched. He was the most powerful man for 100 miles in any direction. But right then, he was just that 18-year-old boy again, lost and searching. The question that had haunted him for 2 decades screamed in his mind, "What happened to you, Sarah?" But as he sat there, another, darker question began to form. What if this wasn't fate? What if this was something else entirely? He killed the engine and got out of the truck. His boots clicked on the pavement, a sound like a ticking clock counting down to a moment that would change everything. He walked across the street, his shadow stretching long in front of him, until it fell over her. "Sarah?" he said, his voice rough. She looked up. Her eyes, those same dark, intelligent eyes, widened. Recognition hit her like a physical blow, followed instantly by a wave of shame so powerful it was like a wall between them. She scrambled to her feet, trying to hide the sign behind her back. "Jake," she whispered, the name a ghost on her lips. "Nobody expects to see their past sitting on the courthouse steps," Jake said, his voice softer than he felt. But here we are. Her story tumbled out over lukewarm coffee and sandwiches from Martha's diner. Not in the diner itself, but out at their old spot, the oak tree behind the high school. They sat on the tailgate of his new, expensive truck, a universe away from the beat-up Ford they'd used all those years ago. She told him about Austin, the pre-med courses her parents forced on her, the misery, the loneliness. She told him about meeting a man named David Reyes, a charming, ambitious business student from a wealthy family. The perfect man on paper, the man her parents had always wanted for her. He was persistent, she said with a bitter laugh, and I was just tired of fighting. I thought if I couldn't have the life I wanted, at least I could have a life that looked successful from the outside. They married and moved to a perfect house in Silicon Valley. David climbed the corporate ladder. For a while, Sarah found a slice of happiness working as a baker in a small cafe. It was the only time, she said, that she felt like herself. But David hated it. He was embarrassed to tell his powerful friends his wife was just a baker. The pressure mounted. Her parents sided with him. "Give up the foolish dream, Sarah. Be the corporate wife we raised you to be." "So I did," she said, her voice hollow. "I gave up the one thing that made me happy. I played the part. But I was dying inside, Jake. I started taking pills just to get through the day. Anxiety meds, then sleeping pills. Then whatever I could find to make the emptiness go away." Jake listened, his face a mask of stone, as she described the slow, ugly descent into addiction. How David, her husband, never noticed until her behavior started embarrassing him at company parties. He gave her an ultimatum: get clean on your own or get out. He wouldn't pay for rehab. It would look bad for his career. Her parents called her weak, a shame on the family. No one offered help. Everyone offered judgment. "So I left," she said simply. "I packed a bag and walked out of that perfect life that was killing me." With no money and a drug addiction she couldn't kick, she fell hard and fast. Homelessness, odd jobs, shelters. Finally, 2 years ago, she got into a program in Dallas and got clean. But starting over at 41 with nothing is a mountain too steep for most. A bout of flu cost her a temp job. The boarding house kicked her out. Her car broke down yesterday, the transmission shot. She had $37 to her name. The courthouse steps were the end of the line. I know what you're thinking, she said, finally looking at him. How did the girl who used to dream of checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread end up here? That's not what I'm thinking, Jake said, his voice quiet but firm. He turned to look at her, this ghost from his past who had just handed him the broken pieces of her life. I'm thinking you've been carrying all this weight by yourself for a long, long time. And I'm thinking maybe you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Tears welled in her eyes. Jake, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, he interrupted. I'm offering. I'm not just broke, she whispered, the words choked with shame. I'm broken. I have nothing to offer you. I'm not the girl you fell in love with. Jake reached over and took her hand. It felt small and fragile in his. You're right, he said. You're not that girl. You're a woman who survived things that would have destroyed most people. You got clean when everyone walked away. You keep getting back up. That's not broken, Sarah. That's strength. He laid out a plan, a crazy, impossible plan. There was an empty commercial space on Main Street. He would lease it. He would front the money for renovations, for equipment, for everything. He would help her open the bakery she'd always dreamed of. A business loan, he called it. You run it, you keep the profits. When you're on your feet, you can start paying me back. This isn't charity, Sarah. It's an investment. I'm betting on your talent. She stared at him, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and a tiny flickering spark of hope. For the first time since he'd found her, she wasn't just surviving the present. She was thinking about the future. That night, she slept in a guest room at his sprawling ranch house, a place built from stone and success. It was bigger and grander than the farmhouse he'd grown up in, but it was also quiet, empty, the home of a man who had everything but the one thing he'd wanted most. Before they went to their separate rooms, Sarah stopped him. Jake, why are you really doing this? Is this about guilt? About us? He looked at her, his expression honest. This is about seeing someone with incredible talent who just needs a chance. And maybe, he admitted, it's about wanting to help write a better ending to a story I've been thinking about for 23 years. As Sarah drifted off to sleep in a real bed for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel that spark of hope grow. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. A second chance. A second rise. But what Jake didn't know as he lay awake staring at his own ceiling was that Sarah's story, the one that broke his heart and opened his wallet, had a few small cracks in it, tiny details that didn't quite add up. She'd mentioned her tiny apartment in Austin was on a street called Riverbend Way. Jake knew Austin like the back of his hand. There was no Riverbend Way. She'd talked about the pressure of her pre-med classes with a Professor Albright. Jake had a cousin who'd been in that same program at UT at the exact same time. He'd never heard of a Professor Albright, probably just the fog of time and trauma, he told himself. He was overthinking it. He had to be, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The next few days were a blur of action. Jake was a man who knew how to get things done. He leased the old Miller's Hardware on Main Street. He brought in his cousin, Eddie Morrison, the best contractor in the county, to start drawing up plans. He drove Sarah to Austin to look at commercial-grade ovens and mixers, writing checks for amounts that made her dizzy. The town, of course, was buzzing. Jake Morrison, bringing back his long-lost flame, setting her up in business. The gossip at Martha's Diner was relentless. Some thought it was romantic. Others, like Carl Hendress, whose insurance agency was across the street, saw it differently. It's a fool's errand, Carl said loudly over breakfast, making sure Jake could hear. Throwing good money after bad. A woman like that, with her history, she'll run it into the ground inside of 6 months. You mark my words. Jake ignored him. He was focused on the project, on Sarah. He watched as she came alive in the empty building, her eyes sparkling as she described where the display cases would go, how the smell of baking bread would greet customers at the door. She was a different person from the broken woman on the courthouse steps. She was an artist planning her masterpiece. She decided to call it Second Rise Bakery, a nod to the baking process and to second chances. It was perfect. It was all perfect, except for the nagging little details. One evening, While Sarah was sketching out kitchen layouts, Jake made a call to his cousin, Brian, the doctor who had gone through pre-med at UT. Hey, Bree, quick question for you. Back when you were at UT, did you ever have a Professor Albright for organic chemistry? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Albright? No, never heard of him. The head of the department back then was a woman, Dr. Lena Petrova, a real dragon. Everyone who went through that program remembered Dr. Petrova. Jake's blood ran cold. You sure? Positive. Why? Just settling an old argument, Jake lied, his voice tight. He hung up the phone, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. It was a small lie, a meaningless detail. Why would she lie about something so small? He tried to push it away. But now that the first crack had appeared, he started seeing others. Sarah had a story for every question, an explanation for every scar, but they were all just a little too polished, a little too practiced, like a script she had memorized. The real break came a week later. They were at the ranch going over invoices. Jake's mail was on the table, and on top was a glossy alumni magazine from his own university. On the cover was a man with a familiar, handsome face, shaking hands with the governor. The headline read, David Reyes, tech titan and philanthropist, pledges $10 million to new business school campus. Jake slid the magazine across the table. Is this him? Your ex-husband? Sarah glanced at it, and for a split second, Jake saw something in her eyes. Not sadness, not anger. It was fear, pure, cold fear. She recovered quickly. Yes, she said, her voice a little too quiet. That's David. Says here he's a big philanthropist, Jake said, watching her carefully. Doesn't exactly sound like the monster who'd refuse to pay for his wife's rehab because it would look bad. People like David are very good at managing their public image, she said, her voice sharp. The money he gives to charity is a fraction of what he spends on himself. It's all for show. The answer was plausible. It made sense. But Jake couldn't shake the image of her eyes, that flash of terror. What was she so afraid of? That night, he did something he felt guilty about. He opened his laptop and hired a private investigator, a discreet firm out of Dallas. He gave them two names, Sarah Chun and David Reyes. I just want to verify some details of a personal history, he told the investigator. Employment records, marriage license, divorce decree, the basics. He told himself it was just for his own peace of mind. An investment of this size required due diligence. It was just business. But he knew it was a lie. This was about the feeling in his gut that told him the woman sleeping in his guest room, the woman he was pouring his time and money and heart into, was hiding something. Something big. The investigator's report came back 3 days later in a password-protected email. Jake opened it, his heart pounding. The marriage license was there. Sarah Chun and David Reyes, married in California. The address was the same one Sarah had described, but there was no record of a divorce. According to the state of California, Sarah Chun and David Reyes were still legally married. Jake stared at the screen, the words blurring. Still married? Why would she lie about that? He scrolled down. There was more. The investigator had pulled property records. The house they'd lived in, the one she said David still owned. It had been sold 2 years ago. And then came the final gut-wrenching piece of the puzzle. The investigator had found a police report, a missing persons report filed a year and a half ago, filed by David Reyes for his wife, Sarah Chun. The report stated she had disappeared from their home, taking nothing but her purse and car. The last transaction on her credit card was at a gas station 50 miles north. Then, nothing. She had vanished. The case was still open. Jake felt the floor drop out from under him. The story she had told him, the addiction, getting kicked out, the homelessness, it was all a lie. She hadn't been kicked out. She had run. But why? And what had she been doing for the past year and a half? The questions hammered at him, each one darker than the last. He thought about the expensive, high-tech equipment she'd insisted on for the bakery. A special convection oven that could reach unusually high temperatures. An industrial-grade ventilation system, far more powerful than what was needed for baking. Eddie, the contractor, had even joked about it. What are you planning on cooking in here, Sarah? This thing could vent a chemical fire. At the time, it had seemed like simple perfectionism. Now it felt sinister. Jake closed the laptop, his mind reeling. The woman he was helping, the woman he was starting to fall for all over again, wasn't a victim. She was a fugitive. And he had just spent over $100,000 building her the perfect place to hide. The next morning, a sleek black sedan with out-of-state plates pulled up in front of the bakery's construction site. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out. He was handsome, charismatic, and his eyes scanned the street with a calm, predatory intensity. It was the man from the magazine cover. David Reyes walked directly up to Jake, who was standing by his truck, and extended a hand. "You must be Jake Morrison," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I'm David Reyes. I believe you've met my wife." Jake's world tilted on its axis. He didn't shake the offered hand. "Your wife?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Last I heard, you two were divorced." A flicker of something, pain, frustration, crossed David's face. "That's what she tells people, I imagine. It's a simpler story than the truth." He looked past Jake, at the building being transformed into the Second Rise Bakery. "Is she here?" "What do you want with her?" Jake asked, planting his feet, a silent challenge. "I want what she took from me," David said, his voice dropping. "And I want to warn you. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You think you're helping a damsel in distress? You're not. You're funding a master criminal." The accusation was so wild, so absurd, that Jake almost laughed. Sarah? A master criminal? But then he thought of the lies, the missing divorce decree, the police report. "What are you talking about?" Jake demanded. "Did she tell you about her parents?" David asked. "The demanding doctors who pressured her into pre-med?" "She mentioned it." "Another lie. Her parents aren't doctors. Her father, Michael Chun, is a graphic designer. Or at least that's his cover. In reality, he's one of the most skilled art forgers in the world. Her mother handles the distribution. It's a family business, Mr. Morrison. And Sarah was their prodigy." Jake stared at him, speechless. "She can replicate anything," David continued, his voice laced with a strange mix of admiration and bitterness. "Signatures, documents, banknotes, passports. Her work is undetectable. I met her at a gallery. I fell for her. I had no idea who she was until it was too late." "Too late for what?" "I have a tech company. We developed a new encryption algorithm, something revolutionary worth billions, the kind of thing governments and corporations would kill for. It was stored on a single encrypted hard drive in my home office safe. A week before we were set to announce it, Sarah disappeared. And so did the drive." The pieces slammed into place in Jake's mind. The lies, the fear in her eyes, the running. It wasn't about addiction or a bad marriage. It was about a high-stakes corporate theft. "She played you, Mr. Morrison," David said, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. "Just like she played me. She uses people. She finds their weakness. For me, it was love. For you, it's nostalgia. And she exploits it. This bakery, this isn't her dream. It's a front. It's a place for her to set up shop, build a new identity, and sell my algorithm to the highest bidder." Jake's mind flashed to the oversized ventilation system, the high-temperature oven, not for baking, for destroying evidence, for the delicate chemical processes involved in forgery. "I don't believe you," Jake said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You don't have to," David said, pulling a business card from his jacket. "But when she disappears again, and your money disappears with her, call me. I tracked her here through a whisper network, a digital breadcrumb she left by accident. Others will be able to track her too. People far more dangerous than me, the people she was supposed to sell the algorithm to. They're not happy she went into business for herself. You're not just in a bad investment, Mr. Morrison. You're in the middle of a war." David got back in his car and drove away, leaving Jake standing in the Texas dust, his entire world ripped apart. Every act of kindness he'd shown Sarah, every dollar he'd spent, now felt like a weapon she had turned against him. He had been played. He was the biggest fool in Millbrook. He walked into the bakery, the smell of fresh paint and sawdust filling the air. Sarah was there, Talking to Eddie the contractor, her face animated and happy. She saw Jake, and her smile widened. It was the same smile that had captured his heart when he was 17. But now all he saw was the lie behind it. He waited until Eddie left. The silence in the cavernous space was heavy. "We need to talk," Jake said, his voice flat. "Okay," she said, her smile faltering at his tone. "Is something wrong?" "I had a visitor this morning," he began, watching her face for any flicker of recognition. "A man named David Reyes." The color drained from her face. The mask fell. The fear he'd seen before was back, tenfold. "What did he want?" she whispered. "He said you're still married. He said you stole something from him, something worth billions. He said your parents are art forgers, and you're some kind of criminal genius." Jake let the words hang in the air, each one an indictment. "He told me this bakery is a front. Is any of it true, Sarah?" She stared at him, her eyes wide with panic. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, he was sure of it. But then her shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight went out of her. She looked around the bakery, at the dream he had built for her, and she started to cry. Softly at first, then with deep, wrenching sobs. "Not all of it," she finally managed to say through the tears, "but most of it." The confession was uglier and more complicated than anything Jake could have imagined. Yes, her family was in the business of forgery. They didn't see themselves as criminals. They saw themselves as artists, craftsmen. They worked for a shadowy syndicate, creating documents, passports, and art that moved money and people through the world's gray markets. Sarah had been raised in it, her talent for mimicry nurtured from childhood. She met David, and for the first time, she saw a way out, a normal life. She fell in love with him, or at least she thought she did. But the syndicate wouldn't let her go. Her skills were too valuable. They saw David's company, his algorithm, as the ultimate score. They pressured her, threatened David, threatened her parents. They gave her a choice. Get us the drive, or we'll destroy everything you love. So she did it. She stole the drive. But instead of turning it over to the syndicate, she ran. "I was trying to protect him," she sobbed, "and myself. If I gave them the algorithm, they would have killed us both to tie up loose ends. My only chance was to disappear, to create a new life where they couldn't find me." The addiction story was a lie, a cover she'd created. The homelessness was real, but it was self-imposed, a way to stay off the grid, to be invisible. For 18 months, she had lived in the shadows, moving from town to town, until her money ran out and her car broke down in the one place she felt she might be safe: home. Seeing Jake on the courthouse steps wasn't part of the plan. It was a fluke, a miracle. "When you offered to help me," she whispered, her face streaked with tears, "I saw it as a sign, a chance to finally build something real, something legitimate. I swear, Jake, I never intended to use the bakery as a front. I just wanted, I just wanted the dream we used to talk about, a normal life." Jake stood there, torn between fury and a sliver of pity. He'd been lied to, manipulated, used. But as he looked at her, broken and sobbing in the middle of their shared dream, he saw a flicker of the girl he once knew, a girl trapped in a life she never chose. "What about the oven?" he asked, his voice hard. "The ventilation system?" Her face flushed with a new wave of shame. "Insurance," she mumbled. "If they found me, if I had to run again, I needed a way to destroy the drive, to burn it so completely that nothing was left. The oven gets hot enough, the ventilation would handle the toxic fumes." It was brilliant. It was diabolical. And it was all happening in his town. "So David was right," Jake said, the betrayal fresh and sharp. "You played me." "At first, yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I saw you and your money as a resource, a means to an end. But then, something happened. Working on this with you, seeing the town, remembering who I used to be, it all started to feel real. My feelings for you, they're real, Jake. I know you won't believe me, but they are." Before Jake could respond, the bell on the temporary door of the bakery chimed. A man stood there. He wasn't dressed in a fancy suit like David. He wore jeans and a worn leather jacket. He was smiling, a friendly, easy smile, but his eyes were cold and empty. Behind him stood two other men, built like brick walls. "Sarah, my dear," the man said, his voice casual, as if he were greeting an old friend. "You have been very, very difficult to find. Your employers are displeased. They've sent me to collect their property." The syndicate had arrived in Millbrook. The man's name was Julian. He didn't shout or make threats. He was worse. He was polite. He walked through the half-finished bakery, admiring the new equipment, his movements fluid and confident. He was a predator in his natural habitat. "This is a lovely setup, Sarah," Julian said, running a hand over the stainless steel countertop. "Cozy, I can see the appeal, but playtime is over. You have something that belongs to us." Jake stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the men. "You need to leave," he said, his voice a low growl. "Now." Julian's cold eyes flicked to Jake. He sized him up in a single glance. The calloused hands, the broad shoulders, the stubborn set of his jaw. "Ah, you must be the local financing," he said with a dismissive smirk. "Mr. Morrison, is it? You've made a poor investment. I'd advise you to cut your losses before things get complicated." "I'm not going anywhere," Jake said. "Brave," Julian mused, "but foolish. You see, we don't want to cause a scene in this charming little town. We just want the hard drive. Give it to us, Sarah, and we'll walk away. Mr. Morrison can have his bakery. You can live your quaint little life. Everyone wins." Sarah looked at Jake, her eyes pleading. "Don't believe him," she whispered. "The moment they have it, we're both dead." Jake's mind was racing. This was out of his depth. This wasn't a dispute over land or cattle prices. These were dangerous, ruthless people. The local sheriff was a good man, but he was used to dealing with bar fights and speeding tickets, not a criminal syndicate. "She doesn't have it," Jake blurted out, a desperate bluff. "She destroyed it." Julian's smile didn't waver. "Did she? That's a shame, because our client was willing to pay a great deal of money for it. And my employers, they don't like losing money. If the drive is gone, we'll have to find another way for Sarah to repay her debt. And we'll have to collect a penalty from you, Mr. Morrison, for interfering." He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the town square, toward Jake's entire world. The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. They wouldn't just come after him. They would come after his land, his business, his people. They would burn his life to the ground. "Give me 24 hours, Sarah said suddenly, her voice shaking but steady. Julian turned his attention back to her. "For what?" "To get it. It's not here. It's hidden. I need time to retrieve it from its hiding place." Julian considered this, tapping a finger on his chin. "I don't trust you, Sarah. You've become unreliable." "You have no choice," she countered, a spark of her old calculating self returning. "If you make a move now, you risk exposing your entire operation. A shootout in a small Texas town? The FBI would be all over you. But if you give me 24 hours, I'll bring you the drive. We meet here tomorrow at noon. You get what you want, and you disappear. It's the cleanest way." Jake could see the gears turning in Julian's head. She was right. A violent confrontation was messy and unpredictable. Her offer was a logical, business-like solution. "All right," Julian said finally, 24 hours. But know this, Sarah. If you're not here with the drive at noon tomorrow, my colleagues and I will begin deconstructing this town, starting with Mr. Morrison's very impressive ranch. Do we have an understanding?" "Perfectly," Sarah said. Julian and his men left as quietly as they had arrived. The moment the door closed, Sarah sagged against the counter, gasping for breath. "What have you done?" Jake demanded. "You don't have the drive here, do you?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's in a safety deposit box in Dallas, but we can't just give it to them." "Why not? Let them have it and get the hell out of our lives." "Because they'll kill us anyway," she cried. "And that algorithm, in their hands, it could cripple financial markets, compromise national security. It's too dangerous. We can't let them have it." Jake stared at her, the enormity of the situation crashing down on him. In the span of 2 weeks, he had gone from a quiet, successful rancher to being caught in the middle of a war between a brilliant forger and a criminal syndicate over a piece of technology that could change the world. "What are we going to do?" he asked, the question heavy with despair. Sarah took a deep breath, and when she looked at him, the fear in her eyes had been replaced by something else, a steely resolve. The look of a woman who had been cornered her whole life and had finally decided to stop running and start fighting. "You built me a bakery, Jake," she said, a strange, fierce light in her eyes. "Now we're going to use it. They think I'm just a baker. They're about to find out what else I can cook up." The plan she laid out was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of high-wire act that could only be conceived by a mind comfortable with deception and risk. It was, Jake realized, a masterpiece of forgery, but instead of using paper and ink, she was going to use people and places. "We can't give them the real drive," she explained, pacing the floor of the bakery like a general planning a battle. "But we can give them a fake one, a perfect replica. It'll look and feel exactly like the original. But when they try to use it, it will unleash a virus that will wipe their entire system and simultaneously ping their location to every law enforcement agency on the planet." "You can do that?" Jake asked, astounded. "The forgery part, yes. The virus part, for that, we need help." There was only one person who could help them. David Reyes. Jake made the call, his gut twisting at the thought of asking the man his girlfriend had betrayed for help. But to his surprise, David didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice grim. "Julian and his people. They're not just a threat to you. They know I developed the algorithm. They won't leave any loose ends. Our only chance is to take them down together." David arrived 2 hours later, looking less like a tech titan and more like a man running on caffeine and fear. He and Sarah stood face to face in the bakery, the air thick with years of lies and betrayal. "I'm sorry, David," she said, her voice quiet. "For everything." "Save it," he said, cutting her off. "Right now, the only thing that matters is survival. Do you have a plan?" She told him. As he listened, his expression shifted from skepticism to grudging respect. "It's crazy," he said when she finished, "but it might just work. I can write the virus, but I'll need a secure terminal and at least 6 hours." The bakery became their command center. While David worked furiously on a laptop in the back office, Sarah transformed the kitchen into a forger's workshop. She sent Jake on a series of strange errands into town. A specific type of polymer from the hardware store, a can of compressed air from the auto shop, a high-resolution scanner from the electronics store. She worked with an artist's intensity, her hands moving with a precision that was both terrifying and beautiful. She molded the polymer into a perfect casing for the fake hard drive. She used the scanner to replicate the manufacturer's labels, aging them digitally to show the exact amount of wear. It was a symphony of deception. Jake's role was to be the face of normalcy. He made calls, rescheduling cattle shipments, talking to his foreman, acting as if nothing was wrong. All the while, Julian's men were watching. A dark sedan was parked down the street, a constant, menacing presence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Main Street, the tension in the bakery became unbearable. The deadline was noon tomorrow, 12 hours to finish an impossible plan. "It's done," David finally said, emerging from the back office, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He held up a small USB stick. "The virus. The moment this is plugged into a network to computer, it's game over for them." Sarah took the stick and carefully inserted it into the fake hard drive she had built. She sealed the casing, the final piece of the trap. She held it up. It was perfect, indistinguishable from the real thing. "Now for part two," she said, her eyes meeting Jake's. "And this is the most important part. We have to make them believe the exchange is real." Her plan for the next morning was simple, and that's what made it so brilliant. She and Jake would act like they were making a run for it. They would leave the bakery early, driving fast out of town, heading east. "They'll follow us," she explained. "They'll think I'm trying to double-cross them. They'll force us off the road, somewhere isolated. That's where we'll do the exchange. Away from innocent people. Away from town." "And David?" Jake asked. "David will be here," Sarah said, gesturing around the bakery. "The moment we leave, he'll call the FBI. He's a known entity to them because of the initial theft. They'll listen to him. He'll tell them everything. The time, the place, the players. He'll coordinate the trap from here." It was a terrifying gamble. It all depended on timing, on performance, on Julian and his men reacting exactly as they predicted. As dawn broke over the Texas prairie, Jake and Sarah got into his truck. Sarah clutched a briefcase containing the fake drive. Jake's hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. This was it. He pulled out onto Main Street and gunned the engine, heading east. In his rearview mirror, he saw the dark sedan pull out from its parking spot and fall in behind them. The chase was on. They drove for 20 miles, the sedan a constant shadow behind them. The sun climbed higher, baking the empty landscape. Just as Sarah had predicted, on a long, deserted stretch of highway, the sedan surged forward, cutting them off. Julian and his two thugs got out, their guns drawn. "Change of plans, Sarah," Julian called out, his voice calm. "The exchange happens now." Jake and Sarah got out of the truck, their hands raised. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment. Had David made the call? Were the FBI on their way? Or were they alone out here, about to be executed on the side of a Texas highway? "The briefcase," Julian commanded. Sarah placed it on the hood of the truck and opened it. The fake hard drive gleamed in the morning sun. One of Julian's men, a tech expert, stepped forward to examine it. He ran a scanner over it, checked the serial numbers against a photo on his phone. He looked at Julian and nodded. It was a perfect match. Julian smiled, a triumphant, cruel smile. "You see, Sarah, business can be so simple when everyone is cooperative." He took the drive and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Unfortunately for you, our business model also values discretion, and leaving witnesses is not discreet." He raised his gun, pointing it directly at Sarah's heart. In that split second, Jake knew he couldn't let it happen. He didn't have a plan. It was pure instinct. He lunged, not at Julian, but at Sarah, tackling her to the ground, shielding her with his own body as the gun fired. The sound cracked through the silent air. And then another sound. The thumping, rhythmic beat of helicopters, coming in low and fast over the horizon. The scream of sirens from both ends of the highway. Black SUVs swarmed the scene, and men in tactical gear poured out, weapons raised. "FBI, drop your weapons!" Julian and his men froze, caught. The trap had sprung. But as Jake lay on the ground, shielding Sarah, he felt a warm, sticky wetness spreading across his side. He looked down. His shirt was soaked in blood. Julian's shot had hit him. The world started to go gray at the edges. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was Sarah's face, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth forming his name. 6 months later, Second Rise Bakery was the beating heart of a town reborn. The story of what happened on that deserted highway had become a Millbrook legend, whispered about in Martha's Diner and embellished with every telling. The FBI had swept in and arrested Julian's crew, and with the evidence from the fake hard drive and David's testimony, they had dismantled the entire syndicate. Sarah, in exchange for her full cooperation and her skills in identifying forged documents within the syndicate, was given immunity. David's algorithm was returned, and he went back to being a tech titan, forever linked to the small Texas town that had nearly been his undoing. Jake's wound had been serious, but not fatal. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital with Sarah by his side every single moment. The lies and betrayal were washed away by the stark reality of what they had faced together. The crucible of fear and violence had burned away everything but the truth. They belonged together. The bakery was no longer a dream or a front. It was a reality, and it was a sensation. People drove from all over Texas to taste the creations of the brilliant baker with the incredible backstory. Sarah hired local kids, taught them her craft, and invested her profits back into the community. The success of Second Rise was contagious. It sparked a renaissance in Millbrook. New businesses opened, tourists came. The town that had been slowly dying was suddenly, vibrantly alive. One evening, Jake and Sarah sat on the tailgate of his truck, back at the old oak tree. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Do you ever think about that first day?" she asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "On the courthouse steps? What if you had just driven by?" "I think about it every day," Jake said, his arm tightening around her. "And I know that every good thing that's happened since, to me, to you, to this town, started in that one moment. the moment I chose to stop. He had stopped for a woman he thought was a victim. He had discovered she was a fugitive, a liar, a genius. He had faced down a criminal syndicate and taken a bullet for her. And he wouldn't change a single second of it. He had set out to rescue the girl he'd lost. But in the end, they had rescued each other. The rancher who saw his childhood love begging on the street had done more than just help her. He had given her a chance to use her incredible, dangerous skills for good. He had helped her forge a new life, the only truly authentic thing she had ever created. And in doing so, he had filled the 23-year-long silence in his own heart. The town of Millbrook was speechless, not just because of the thrilling secret they now shared, but because they had all witnessed the living proof that sometimes the most beautiful things can rise from the most broken places. If you were Jake, what would you have done when you found out the truth? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the story of twists, turns, and second chances, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss the story we have coming for you next.